Hello and welcome to this brand new edition of Global Lens on Newsline Live with me, Neha Khanna. As always, we have a packed show for you with all the top news stories from around the globe. Let's get started with our big focus. A day after France, Belgium and Slovenia said they would back the International Criminal Court's arrest warrants against Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his Defense Minister Yoav Gallant for war crimes and crimes against humanity in Gaza, Israel suffered another massive blow today. Ireland, Norway and Spain have announced today that they will formally recognize a Palestinian state from the 28th of May. Spain and Ireland have said their decision is not against Israel nor in favor of Hamas. Instead, it is in support of peace. Norway was the first to make the announcement in a move coordinated with the other two countries. Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Støre said the move was in support of moderate forces that are on a retreating front in a protracted and cruel conflict. This is an investment in the only solution that can bring lasting peace in the Middle East, he added, referring to the two-state solution which would see an Israeli state and a Palestinian state existing peacefully next to each other. He also said he hoped the recognition of Palestinian statehood by the three countries would bring renewed momentum to the peace talks. Irish Foreign Minister Michael Martin said, "Today, we state clearly our unambiguous support for the equal right to security, dignity and self-determination for the Palestinian and Israeli peoples." The country's Prime Minister, Simon Harris, stressed that Hamas is not the Palestinian people. Today's decision to recognize Palestine has been taken to help create a peaceful future. It's a decision being taken on its merits. But we cannot ignore the fact that we are taking it as Palestinians in Gaza are enduring the most appalling suffering, hardship and starvation. A humanitarian catastrophe unimaginable to most and unconscionable to all is unfolding in real time. Harris's comments were echoed by Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez, who said the move was not against Israel, it's not against the Jews, it's not in favor of Hamas. This recognition is not against anyone. It is in favor of peace and coexistence. Predictably, Israel is furious. It has warned that the move would mean more instability in the region. It's recalled its ambassadors to all the three countries for consultations. The Israeli Foreign Minister said, Israel will not go over this in silence. There will be serious consequences. Israel Katz also said, the three countries' ambassadors in Israel will be summoned for reprimand talks, during which they will be shown a video of the abduction of female Israeli soldiers on the 7th of October. He added, I'm sending a clear message today. Israel will not hold back against those who undermine its sovereignty and endanger its security. After the terrorist organization Hamas carried out the largest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust, after it committed the most horrific sex crimes the world has seen, these countries have chosen to give a reward to Hamas and Iran and recognize a Palestinian state. History will remember that Spain, Norway and Ireland decided to award a gold medal to the murderers and rapists of Hamas who raped teenage girls and burnt babies. That's what the Israeli foreign minister said. Hamas, which controls Gaza and is currently at war with Israel, has said the announcements would be a turning point in the international position on the Palestinian issue. Bassem Naim, a senior Hamas figure, has said the brave resistance of the Palestinian people was behind the move. Hamas's rival, the Palestinian Authority, which controls parts of the Israeli-occupied West Bank, has said Norway, Spain and Ireland have demonstrated their unwavering commitment to delivering the long overdue justice to the Palestinian people. The Office of the President of the Palestinian Authority said this step reflects the country's keenness to support the Palestinian people and their inalienable and legitimate rights to their land, to their homeland. The issue of Palestinian statehood has vexed the international community for decades now. Since the 7th October attacks by Hamas, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has doubled down on his opposition to such a plan, saying, The creation of a Palestinian state would compromise Israel's security. Israel's foreign ministry said on social media that recognizing a Palestinian state would lead to more terrorism, instability in the region, and jeopardize any prospects for peace. Earlier this month, 143 of the 193 members of the United Nations General Assembly voted in favor of Palestine joining the United Nations, something that only states can do. But only some nations in the 27-member European Union are among them. Before today's announcements, only 9 European countries supported Palestinian statehood, and they had taken that decision all the way back in 1988 when they were part of the Soviet bloc. Most other European countries and the United States still believe that recognition for Palestine should come only as part of a long-term two-state solution to the conflict, and now is not the right time. Slovenia and Malta are another 2 countries which recently said they were considering a formal recognition. Israel has come under fierce criticism for its war in Gaza. Earlier in May, a panel of independent UN experts condemned what they termed the continued and systematic onslaught of violence committed against Palestinians in Gaza. The agency has repeatedly called for a ceasefire and the release of hostages taken by Hamas. The Biden administration has pushed back against the move to recognize a Palestinian state, reiterating that while the US president backs a path to a two-state solution, it would continue to pursue this path through diplomatic negotiations between the 2 parties. A White House spokesperson has said the US president believes a Palestinian state should be realized through direct negotiations between the parties, not through unilateral recognition. The question we're asking on Global Lens tonight is this: what exactly does this recognition by these 3 countries of a Palestinian state mean for the Palestinian people, for Israel, and for the Middle East? Could more countries follow suit in the days ahead? And does this big development come as the latest sign of Israel's growing isolation on the global stage?
Today, Ireland, Norway and Spain are announcing that we recognise the state of Palestine. Each of us will now undertake whatever national steps are necessary to give effect to that decision. In the lead up to today's announcement, I've spoken with a number of other leaders and counterparts, and I'm confident that further countries will join us in taking this important step in the coming weeks. This is an historic and important day for Ireland and for Palestine. Taking our place on the world stage and being recognised by others as having the right to be there was a matter of the highest importance for the founders of our state.
The government has decided that Norway will recognize the state of Palestine effective May 28. With this recognition, Norway will regard Palestine as an independent state with all the associated rights and duties. According to international law, a Palestinian state must live in peace within secure, internationally recognized borders and comply with all relevant UN resolutions. The borders between Palestine and Israel should be based on those before June 4, 1967, from the 1949 Armistice Agreement with Jerusalem as a shared capital and provisions for land exchanges. The announcement reaffirms Norway's long-standing position that Palestinians have a fundamental right to their own state. Both Israelis and Palestinians deserve to live in peace within their respective states. This was the basis for the UN partition plan in 1947, leading to Israel's recognition by Norway and other countries in 1949. Lasting peace in the Middle East requires a two-state solution, which necessitates a Palestinian state. Recognizing Palestine supports moderate forces in a protracted and cruel conflict. This is an investment in the only solution that can bring lasting peace in the Middle East. It is a strong call for other countries to recognize Palestine and revive the process towards a two-state solution. Amid war and suffering, we must keep alive the hopes for two states, Israel and Palestine, living in peace.
All right, so what do these developments mean? We will look at that in great detail on the other side of this quick break. Stay with us.
For the very first time in our investigation, we unmasked the killer of Ravindra Matre.
In 5G, we have to stand with the world, and in 6G, we have to lead the world.
Winning a Grammy was an absolutely surreal experience.
That ink is a semi-permanent dye called the indelible ink.
We are the sole manufacturer of this indelible ink.
Don't try to repair something which is working.
And if you have facial recognition, you can go vote in any booth anywhere based on where you are, and then it will be recorded that you can't vote anywhere else again.
Can we retire indelible ink and use biometrics? Theoretically, my answer would be yes.
This and more. Streaming on News 9 Plus. News is now content. Subscribe and get free vouchers.
Welcome back. You're watching Global Lens on News 9 Live with me, Neha Khanna, and we're discussing the big development of 3 countries today recognizing Palestinian statehood. Let's introduce our guest. Joining me on Global Lens tonight, he is Shaya Rosenman, journalist at the Jerusalem Post, joining us live from Israel. Ambassador Suresh Goyal, former Indian diplomat, and in a moment we're hoping to be joined by Pramit Pal Chaudhary, foreign affairs analyst. A warm welcome to my guest, Shaya Rosenman. If I could begin with you. Of course, as could have easily been predicted, Israel has reacted with a lot of anger to this development. But my question to you is this. One day, France, Belgium and Slovenia say they would back the International Criminal Court's arrest warrants against Israeli leaders, including the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. The next day, 3 countries, Ireland, Norway and Spain, decide they are going to recognize a Palestinian state starting from the 28th of May. Most people see this as Israel's growing isolation on the global stage. How are people in your country seeing these developments today?
Good evening. I don't think very many people take all this seriously. I remember growing up, in the 80s, Yasser Arafat, every year or two would threaten to declare a Palestinian state, and it's like an old joke at this point. The International Criminal Court, again, it's a joke of even poorer taste. The court has no jurisdiction. We have never signed the Rome Statute. Palestine is not a state, so they cannot be part of the court. The prosecutor Karim Khan, since evidence does not matter at all, he could have issued a warrant for Prime Minister Modi and Defense Minister Rajnath Singh for the same price. I think it's pretty much meaningless. I heard the statements that you quoted that were shown of the Spanish foreign minister and the Norwegian foreign minister. I think they're wrong. It's not a move for peace or coexistence. I don't see what coexistence means in this sense if Israel is not part to this. I think it's a move that will embolden radical elements, violent elements. It will do nothing for the Palestinian people. They will get no more freedom, no more human rights, no more prosperity under Hamas, nor under the Palestinian Authority, which is equally as corrupt and violent. And it will not only lead to regional instability, it will lead to global instability.
All right. This will lead to regional and global instability, you are saying. Of course, most Israelis today are also saying this is a reward for Hamas. However, the prime ministers of these 3 countries, including the Spanish prime minister, have made it abundantly clear that this move is not against Israel, it's not against the Jews, it is not in favor of Hamas, it is not a recognition against anyone, It is in favor of peace and coexistence. You're saying not many in Israel are taking this seriously. Let's get a word in from our Indian guest, Ambassador Suresh Goyal. You know, as you would expect, some very angry reactions are coming in from Israel today. But even as Israelis might want to believe that these decisions are meaningless, that a Palestinian state as of today means nothing, but the question we're really asking is, and I'd like your take on this, as I said, one day three European countries say we back the ICC's arrest warrant against Netanyahu, and those countries include France. We know President Macron has been very critical of Netanyahu's war in Gaza. And today you have another three countries saying, yes, we will give recognition to Palestinian statehood, however angry it may make Israel. Therefore, do you not believe that this does come as yet another sign that there is growing international anger against Israel's war in Gaza, and the country is more isolated today than ever before?
Neha, in very short, cryptic bullet points, really. If you look at today's strategic position, after the Ukraine war, and now we have the war in the Middle East, Hamas, Israel, whichever way you want to describe it, which is adding extensively, enormously to the global instability. And that global instability means not just strategic and political instability. It also means economic instability, because it is going to impact, as it already has, on the global trade, oil prices, energy stability, and the food security. And therefore, we need to look at the whole thing, not just in the context of Middle East, but also global implications. My sense now really is that when European countries, particularly France, Ireland, Belgium, and I know these countries, they play a great role within the European Union, and they play a great role in the United Nations affairs. When they come together to basically take the kind of actions, either on the ICC or recognition of Palestine, that does mean a sea change, a very, very significant change in the metrics of the Middle East. That is the point number one. Point number two, I think sooner or later, Israel has to recognize that the only way to achieve stability in the region is to have a Palestinian state within secure borders. The sooner the better. If you do not do that, you will continue to have the same kind of a situation that you have had there for the last more than 50 years, 60, 70 years, really speaking. Israel was created for various reasons. Creation of Israel led to many factors. Anyway, there is so much of water really down the river Nile. But the fact is that the stability requires recognition of a Palestinian state. And therefore, that is point number two. Netanyahu must do that. Number three, ICC statute. On the one hand, the USA is welcoming of the ICC decision against President Putin. But when the same kind of decisions are taken, not just against Israel, but both Hamas and Israel, there is sudden uproar in the USA.
Double standards. Clear double American standards.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the last point really here is, I think, Europe is looking at the elections in the USA when Trump comes, which is more likely to come. And I think Europe is looking at the future now rather than later.
Okay, very interesting. So Europe is also looking closely at the US election. Ambassador Goyal seems to have declared Trump the winner already, though of course the elections are going to be held on the 5th of November. I need to take another quick break here on Global Lens. We'll continue this conversation on the other side.
Forever there are simultaneous election of parliament, assembly and municipality and panchayat. So So that framework has to be given in the constitution. That amendment has been suggested.
Are you going to take away the power of dissolution?
I mean, it doesn't require any rocket science to do this. It's a simple constitutional amendment, and the idea is everything goes together.
The Law Commission has set the ball rolling for one nation, one election. Basically, if all goes well, then India may see simultaneous elections to Lok Sabha, state assemblies, municipalities and panchayats in 2029.
This and more. Streaming on News 9 Plus. News is now content. Subscribe and get free vouchers.
Welcome back. You're watching Global Lens on News 9 Live with me, Neha Khanna. Let me go back to our Israeli guest. Yeshaya, you said earlier that, the decision by these three countries to recognize Palestinian statehood is essentially a reward for Hamas, even though these countries have clarified that this is not in favor of Hamas, this is not against Israel, this is in favor of peace and coexistence. You heard, the Indian guest, Ambassador Suresh Goyal there, saying that at the end of the day, there is this recognition around the world that the only lasting solution to this decades-old conflict is a two-state solution. And the trouble is that the Israeli leadership, especially the current one, which is seen as one that's led by, right-wing leaders who've taken very hardline positions, the fact that this establishment refuses to even accept that one day there could be a Palestinian state, that is where the entire problem lies. And as long as Israel continues to maintain this position, there can never be peace. Outside of Israel, that is the belief held by almost everyone, including Israel's closest ally, the United States.
So what I would say is that Salman Rushdie recently said in an interview to the German newspaper Bild, he stated it correctly, that if a Palestinian state were to be established tomorrow, it would be a Taliban-style state run by Hamas and hell-bent on war against Israel. So those are the facts on the ground. Theoretical formulations will not help. We are looking for the life and prosperity and welfare of the people on the ground, and that is what will happen. So in practice, a Palestinian state will be a disaster. I would like to explain it a bit more theoretically to the Indian viewer. If on 15 August 1947, Prime Minister Nehru would have gotten up at the Red Fort and said that we have a tryst with destiny, and our destiny is to kill every Muslim in the subcontinent and violently oppose Manusmriti upon the militias around the globe, I would never have supported Indian independence. That, again, you can't found a state that will be, by definition, belligerent and hell-bent on destroying its neighbors. So as long as this is the Palestinian worldview that is broadly supported by the Palestinian public, we can't allow such a thing. The best way forward is by encouraging a program of encouraging Hamas first to surrender, then a full de-radicalization styled after the denazification of Germany after World War II, which means a full, forceful takeover of the Palestinian media and education system to re-educate the public and start a genuine peace movement. There is no Palestinian peace movement. So until that happens, nothing can change. As to the U.S. Public stance, all it says is that the U.S. and the U.K., for whoever's following the election trends there, which are very negative, it just means that they have been conquered by the same Islamist and radical forces. The worst elements that the Muslim world has to offer.
But I'm talking about President Biden. Forget about the protesters at American universities or elsewhere. President Biden is on record to say, yes, we believe in the two-state solution. And he and Netanyahu have publicly disagreed on this.
I will say that the reason that President Biden does this is because his staff are pro-Hamas. His director of intelligence at the U.S. National Security Council, Maher Bitar, is a Palestinian who is head of Students for Justice for Palestine, a pro-Muslim Brotherhood aligned organization. Rob Malley was quietly almost accused of spying for Iran. His administration has been infiltrated by the most radical elements that the Muslim world has to offer. This started under Barack Obama and is continuing now. That is the simple answer.
Okay, Yeshaya, I have to say you've just made an astounding statement saying the Biden administration has been infiltrated by Hamas sympathizers. We are talking about a president who is Israel's biggest, staunchest supporter and ally. This is a president who has stuck his neck out and who seems to have put himself in a lot of trouble with a large section of the American population ahead of a crucial American presidential election with his unstinting support to Israel's war in Gaza. And you are accusing the administration of being sympathetic to Hamas. I think that's absolutely astounding. That is astounding. I need to take a break. Yeshaya, I promise to come back to you. I need to take another break here on Global Lens. Don't go anywhere. We will continue this fascinating conversation on the other side.
Can the Trinamool candidate from Baharampur hit the ball out of the park?
50-60 दिन बहुत ज़्यादा बोल रहा हूँ, उससे पहले ही काम दिखने स्टार्ट हो जाएंगे.
Pitted opposite Pathan in Team BJP is Dr. Nirmal Kumar Saha.
The fight is not Adit Chaudhary and Nirmal Saha. The fight between Modi versus Rahul Gandhi.
Yusuf Pathan and Nirmal Saha, two professionals who have switched to politics, are taking on Congress leader Adhir Ranjan Chaudhary. Can one of the first-time politicians end his winning streak? This and more. Streaming on News 9 Plus. Subscribe and get free vouchers.
Why is the state not looking at putting an embargo on that?
As a Telangana person, I will not accept.
How do ordinary folks deal with this?
I don't think anybody has isolated Ajit Dada Pawar. Ajit Dada has isolated himself.
That led to a lot of bad blood between the ruling partners.
It is not true. You know it very well, who these elements are, who these individuals are. And these are the very reasons why you see a division in the party.
Now this contest between Supriya Sule and Sunetra Pawar is really a proxy war between uncle and nephew. And it's being fought in the family bastion of Baramati.
This and more. Streaming on News 9 Plus. Subscribe and get free vouchers.
I was ready to be a CEO at 26.
Only the guys with the strongest heads can handle hard situations.
There is a blurring line between arrogance and confidence.
This is the philosophy of FC Bayern Munich.
World premiere on 25th of May, only on News 9 Live at 9 p.m.
America, there is an inheritance tax. In India, you don't have that.
कांग्रेस की लूट जिंदगी के साथ भी और जिंदगी के बाद भी.
Our manifesto combines ideology with effective administration, with delivery that is long overdue.
Rahul Gandhi is talking about redistribution of wealth. You know, these are the things people are alert to. They want to know, what does Congress say when you say redistribute wealth?
Welcome back. You're watching Global Lens on News 9 Live with me, Neha Khanna. Let's now go across to Pramit Pal Chaudhary. Pramit, thanks for joining us on Global Lens. I want to ask you two pointed questions. One day, three countries say we back the International Criminal Court's arrest warrants against the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The next day, another three countries say we are going to recognize a Palestinian state, much to the chagrin of Israel. Do these developments indicate to you that Israel's isolation on the global stage is deepening with passage of time? That's my first question. And the second is, what does this decision by these three countries to recognize Palestinian statehood really mean for the Palestinian people?
So on the first part, yes, Israel's definitely facing declining international support, or at least neutrality. I would still argue the vast bulk of countries in the world actually don't care one way or the other about the Gaza Strip. But the area where Israel, I think, is losing the most degree of support is in Europe, partly because Europe sees itself as a continent, at least Western Europe and the European Union, that follows the rule of law as embodied by things like the International Court of Justice, the World Court, and one that has been less than pleased with the overall failure of, in their view, of Israel, especially under Netanyahu, to consider the possibility, at least, of a two-state solution, or even allow the Palestinian Authority to function in any sensible manner. So as a consequence, yes, within Europe, we've seen a sharp decline in support for Israel, and we're now starting to see it manifest in actual policies. A number of governments in mainly again in Europe accept the International Criminal Court's judgments as part of their domestic law. That if the ICC passes warrants such as this, then they must, by definition, abide by them. I think that's a mistake. I think the ICC is overstepping its jurisdiction here. Israel is not a signatory to the ICC, nor, for example, is India. And by issuing warrants on the basis of a jurisdiction that it does not that it should not have, and second, on the basis of international law that is not binding on countries that have not acceded to it, they're moving, I think, into dangerous ground, and the ICC will suffer from the West, countries like America, and potentially India on this issue later on. But having said that, yes, there's no doubt Netanyahu's position, the nature of this war, and the sense that Netanyahu partly did this war, a lot of the blame for this war is Netanyahu himself. His decision to, for some strange reason, think that he could strike a deal with Hamas, go after the Palestinian Authority instead, reduce the security of his southern border to nothing. All of these point to the fact that there's not that much support for Netanyahu himself, and the view that he's pursuing this government war to a large extent for his own political survival. Has meant that in Europe, some parts of Africa and other places, there's a huge drop in the idea that Israel versus Palestine, there is no moral equivalence, that Israel is on a slightly higher plane. And that sense that now actually, if anything, the Palestinian cause, because there is two, should we say, different schools of Palestinian nationhood, is now superior morally to that of Israel, which is a very unfortunate position for Israel to be in.
A very unfortunate position for Israel to be in. That's a very significant statement you're making there, Pramit. Let me take this to Ambassador Goel. Ambassador Goel, earlier this month, 143 of the 193 members of the United Nations General Assembly voted in favor of Palestine joining the United Nations, something that only states can do. Before today's announcements by these three countries, only 9 European countries supported Palestinian statehood, and they took that decision all the way back in 1988 when they were still part of the Soviet bloc. Today you have Ireland, Norway and Spain saying we're going to recognize Palestinian statehood starting this month. Do you believe this could have a cascading effect in the days ahead, and other countries, especially in Europe, could in fact follow suit, deepening troubles for Israel and Netanyahu?
I think it certainly will. I recall the days of the democratic movement for South Africa before 1994, when India was supporting the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. It gathered momentum immediately after countries like Norway, Sweden, etc. from Europe. They came to support the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa, and it began to gather momentum, which brought the USA in terms of really introducing sanctions and so on and so forth. And slowly there was a dismantlement of the apartheid regime. I'm recalling history simply because Norway, Sweden, countries in Europe have had a past history in supporting these kind of democratic movements, freedom movements in the other countries, and they do have had the impact in the past really. Number two, in the past, I think it would be rather presumptuous to say that this effect is going to be immediate and rapid. All these things will take time, but I think it's going to happen now. Certainly there will be a greater thrust, but it will still take some time, I'm sure.
All right, let me go back to Yeshaya. Yeshaya, you heard Pramit Pal Chaudhary, the foreign affairs analyst on our show. So I want to ask you this question. What would you say to those who say that your Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, himself is to a very large extent responsible for this war, for his failure, massive failure to prevent the 7th October attacks? There are also, theories that he, in a sense, emboldened Hamas in his attempt to weaken the Palestinian Authority. The fact that he did not take, the threat from Hamas seriously enough and put in jeopardy the security of the Israeli people. And today, there are many around the world who believe that he wants the war to go on and on for the sake of his own political survival, because he knows that the day the war is over, there will be an election in that country and the people of Israel will send him packing. What would you say to that?
Yes, so let's break this down a bit. As to Prime Minister Netanyahu's failure to protect Israel, this is something that that is widely agreed upon in the Israeli public, that it was his failure. I will also mention some people who want to be prime minister after him, such as Minister Gantz and Eisenkot. They are equally to blame for the terrible events of October 7th. We must also recognize, of course, that the violent act itself was committed by Hamas. It was completely unprovoked. But yes, Netanyahu did not prevent it. We must understand what that means. That means that in order to prevent it, he would have had to have been more aggressive pre-October 7th, not less aggressive, okay? As to prolonging the war to prolong his political survival, I personally, I don't think Netanyahu will survive politically when the war is over, but fighting the war, the Israeli public thinks that the war is being fought for the survival of Israel, not Netanyahu. Whether it's prolonged or not, I think the Israeli public wants to see the war successful, wants to see Israel victorious as soon as possible. So personally, I think prolonging the war is a mistake. Prime Minister Netanyahu is, I've heard sources say that he is hoping that Trump will take over from Biden and will have easier international arena. But I think the Israeli public wants victory as soon as possible. As to the international situation and growing isolation and Netanyahu and those kind of things, we have to understand that the primary factor moving Western Europe and to some US as well in the primary elections is demographics. The Muslim vote in UK, in France, in Michigan, and other places, and Indians should have no illusion that these people are not moderate Muslims, the kind that walk the streets of Delhi. the people leading these movements are radical Muslims, and they are not on the side of India. You should have no illusions about that.
You know, I just want to point out one thing. The leaders of the three countries who are recognizing Palestinian state have said so, and there are many around the world, including here in India, including myself, who are of the firm belief, Yeshaya, that you cannot equate all the Palestinian people with Hamas. Hamas is not the Palestinian people. All the Palestinian people are not Hamas. The more than 35,000 Palestinians who've been killed in the war so far, according to the Gazan Health Ministry, not all of them were Hamas terrorists. I think we need to make that clear distinction between the terror organization that wreaked havoc in southern Israel on the 7th of October and the Palestinian civilians, thousands of whom have lost their lives. More than 50% or rather 80% of the Palestinian population in Gaza today is displaced, and many of those, in fact, who've died in this 7-month-old conflict were women and children. They were not Hamas terrorists. We need to keep, we need to bear those facts in mind and not paint everyone with the same brush. Pramit Pal Chaudhary, I want to ask you this question. I asked you this question earlier, if I could just ask you to dwell on this again. 3 European countries deciding to recognize Palestinian statehood. In concrete terms, what does this really mean for the Palestinian cause, for the Palestinian people? Our Israeli friend says, oh, it's a joke. We've been hearing for decades about the Palestinian state. Nothing's going to change. Also, talk to us about the duplicity of the Biden administration. On the one hand, President Biden says, of course, we believe in the two-state solution, and Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Biden don't agree on this. But on the other hand, they keep insisting now is not the right time. This, should not happen through unilateral recognition. Palestinian statehood must be achieved only through direct negotiations between the two parties, knowing fully well that Israel is bitterly opposed to the idea of a two-state solution, or at least the current regime is.
Well, in the first part, I have to admit, I don't think it makes all that much difference. We have I can't remember the exact figures, but I think about 140 countries out of the 190 in the UN or something on that lines, or maybe actually 143, because that's how many voted for this, but who actually already recognize Palestine, including India. We were the first countries who recognize the state of Palestine, but not Hamas. Very clear on this. India has always made it clear we support secular Palestinian nationhood, and we consider Hamas a terrorist organization. We support the Al-Fatah, the Palestinian Authority, but we do not under any circumstances support Hamas and have no relationship with them whatsoever. So add 3 more countries to that list, not that big a deal. I fully agree. In many ways, I think these countries, but I think what the real issue is that a lot of these European countries in many ways held back. Why did they not recognize Palestine earlier? Was because they believed that their recognition would either have to be part of a larger peace process, it would be a sort of reward, if you wish, for that peace process, or they did not believe Palestine was a valid state. That's basically now breaking down, if you wish, that they feel they have to do something to, and it's more, I would argue, less about supporting Palestinians than it is about punishing Israel. That's, I think, the driving force for some of these countries. Will it make a difference? No, not all that much, because fundamentally, whether Norway decides to support Palestine, who really cares? Because Norway is simply not a major country. So as far as the American administration is concerned, and this is not too different from the Indian position, which is that we would like to see a peace process. We believe the Indian government's policies. We'd like to see a Palestinian state and an Israeli state next to each other, living in a state of peace and security, but it must be the consequence of a negotiated settlement. I should point out, even to this day, the majority of Americans still support Israel. They do not support, definitely not support Hamas, and do not support things. So for Biden, it makes no sense for him to come out and say we support, begin a two-state solution right now. It's not politically popular even to this day. And as far as let's just say the foreign policy and the security establishment of America, I would say this makes, again, even less sense for us to get involved on a peace process where there's no peace to be had.
Okay.
So that, I think, is a realistic position.
That's a realistic position taken by President Biden. But before we close this discussion, Pramit, I want to ask you one quick question. There are many, especially in Israel, who keep saying they're hoping that Biden loses the upcoming presidential election, Trump comes into the White House, because they somehow believe that Trump will be a better friend to Israel that President Biden has been. Now, President Biden is an individual who some would say has practically put his presidency on the line. While he has offered unstinting support to Israel in its war in Gaza, a very unpopular war, especially given the recent protests that we've seen across the United States, not just on American campuses, but even elsewhere. Do you really believe that if Biden were to lose the election and Trump were to come into the White House, there would be any drastic change in American policy towards Israel?
It's a good question. It's hard to judge because, one, yes, Biden, I think, is unusually pro-Israeli within his own administration. Even members of his own cabinet, his national security advisor, secretary of state are believed not to feel that he has gone too far on that front. Biden is an old cold warrior. He's a man of almost a World War II vintage. And he takes the position that if you are my sense is that he takes the view, if you are an American ally, a treaty ally of the United States, then it is America's duty to support you, wrong or right. And that in many ways is both a negative and a positive. Trump, on the other hand, and I think if Biden were to come to power, I don't think he'd really shift on that. Because if Biden comes back, he would not shift on that. That's just the way his mind is. Trump, while he is outwardly more pro-Israeli, definitely had a good relationship with Netanyahu, he's also much more transactional and less about principle. So in many ways, he is fundamentally unpredictable as to where his policy will go. We assume continuity with Biden, but I would say that it is built on a slightly weaker firmament as far as Trump is concerned. There's a fair amount of evidence that Trump's real loyalty in the Middle East is neither to Israel, definitely not to Palestine, which he doesn't care about, but it is to Saudi Arabia and the UAE.
Because that's where the money is. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. That's because he's very transactional. That's where Trump, as a real estate guy, he looks at these type of people and he says, these are the real people.
Yes.
So he would be swayed, in my view, very strongly by a group like by Riyadh. And if Saudi Arabia, which until now, it's now starting to shift, it has been otherwise trying very hard it has no love for Hamas, the Saudi royal family, has begun to take a harder and harder stance. Trump would be, in my view, potentially willing to reconsider his support for Israel, at least rhetorically.
Okay, very interesting. I think our Israeli friends would do well to remember that Trump is not only transactional, he is probably the most unpredictable leader the world has seen in recent times. On that note, Yeshai Rosenman, Ambassador Suresh Goel and Pramit Pal Chaudhary, thank you so much to all three of you for joining me on Global Lens tonight. All right, let's now turn our attention to Iran. Well, the country is mourning the sudden loss of President Ibrahim Raisi and his companions in a helicopter crash near the Azerbaijan border. In capital Tehran today, Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei led funeral prayers for President Ibrahim Raisi, who died in that helicopter crash over the weekend. The prayers took place ahead of the funeral, with the mourners gathering in large numbers to pay their last respects to the departed president. The crash has struck Iran at a particularly tumultuous time as the country grapples with the deepening crisis between the clerical leadership and its citizens. Issues such as tightening social and political controls alongside severe economic hardship have heightened tensions across Iran, I beg your pardon. Now, President Raisi's body was first flown from Tabriz, the major city nearest to the remote crash site, to Tehran's airport. From there, it made its way to the holy Shiite city of Qom. After lying in state at Tehran's Grand Musalla Mosque, the body will be transferred to his hometown of Mashhad in eastern Iran, where he will be buried tomorrow. The event has plunged Iran into mourning, and there are serious questions now about the future leadership of the country. All right, and as we wrap up this edition of Global Lens, let's get to the latest on the Singapore Airlines flight that has been making global headlines for all the wrong reasons. It was a flight from hell, one which the hapless and traumatized passengers and crew are sure to remember for the rest of their lives. More than 140 travelers and crew who were on board a Singapore Airlines flight, which was hit by severe turbulence, landed in Singapore on a relief flight earlier today. Passengers on board SQ321, which was heading from London to Singapore, recounted scenes of absolute terror, with one passenger saying he saw a woman with an awful gash on her head and heard another screaming in agony. The flight dropped 6,000 feet in just about 5 minutes after hitting an air pocket. A 73-year-old British man, Jeff Kitchen, died from a suspected heart attack on board this flight, while several others remain seriously injured.
British Embassy staff were seen arriving at a Bangkok hospital on Wednesday to visit passengers who were still being treated for injuries after deadly turbulence hit their Singapore Airlines flight. SQ321 was flying more than 220 passengers and crew from London to Singapore the day before when it encountered severe turbulence. A 73-year-old British passenger died of a suspected heart attack, and at least 30 people were injured, according to the airlines, though a Thai hospital said it was treating 71 people from the flight. Zafran Azmir was a passenger aboard the Boeing 777 flight, which was diverted to Bangkok.
I saw people from across the aisle just like going completely horizontal, hitting the ceiling and landing back down in like really awkward positions, people like getting massive gashes in their head, concussions.
The 28-year-old student told Reuters that it happened so quickly, no one had time to respond. He also said he had no idea how bad the situation was until the plane made its emergency landing.
Like, I didn't realize the things that broke within the airplane, the dents that were made in the overhead, like luggage compartments, and all the additional kind of paneling above our heads. Like, I thought it was just the oxygen masks coming out and then popping out the panel, but in fact, like heads had literally pushed through and broken those plastic panels, and like there's blood and there's bits and pieces just broken everywhere.
Azmir was among some 140 passengers and crew who finally arrived in Singapore on Wednesday aboard a Singapore Airlines relief flight. Company Chief Executive Goh Choon Pong said he was deeply saddened by the incident.
We are very sorry for the traumatic experience that everyone on board SQ321 went through.
According to Singapore's Transport Minister, the city-state's transport safety investigators have arrived in Bangkok, where the plane remains. The minister said US transport safety officials were also being sent to support the probe, since the incident involves American playmaker Boeing. It occurred over Myanmar's Irrawaddy Basin about 10 hours into the flight, Singapore Airlines said. Weather forecasting service AccuWeather said rapidly developing explosive thunderstorms near its flight path most likely contributed to the violent turbulence.
Indeed, a flight from hell. Well, that's all the time we have on this edition of Global Lens. Thanks so much for watching. We're leaving you with some more stories that made global headlines today.